Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the process of planning and installation. Really, the installation process is fairly simple. You plug the ISO in, you boot it, you start the installation process, and then once that's done, once you can get into the DCUI console. Now, the DCUI console is one of your two options here. So actually, let me get this in the right order. The ESXi host has no GUI. That's entirely on purpose. That improves performance because you don't have all that graphical nonsense to worry with. You also don't have the increased attack surface of all those pretty helpful user space applications. It is much easier to secure and harden the attack surface of a device which has no GUI, which has no direct interface like that over one which has got all the whistles and bells. Now, step one, you load this thing. You boot from the ISO, let the installer program run. It is essentially a very simple, ESXi host runs, the ESXi, I think it's ESXi X or something like that. It runs on top of a Linux kernel, and you can actually see that happening. If you reboot a Linux, an ESXi host and watch it, you'll watch it do lots of very typical Linux Unix boot things. And we may actually have seen a little bit of that in the previous video as I was rebooting an ESXi host, which had core dumped on me. Anyway, so we've got these two options. The console interfaces, there's the DCUI console, which if you've got a keyboard and mouse plugged into it, if you've got a keyboard and a monitor plugged into it, the mouse will do you no good. You do everything you do with a keyboard and a monitor. And it's actually this very simple yellow and black color scheme. In fact, let me pop over that for a minute. And here we go. So this is actually, so this is what an ESXi host, a DCUI console looks like in kind of sleep mode. You click in, you tap your keyboard, you get this sort of gray and yellow. And if you want to get into it, you hit your F2 and you'll log in. Or if you want to shut it down, you hit F12. And again, you have to log in. And it'll also warn you, hey, you might have some VMs running. Are you sure? You can forcibly shut all of them down if you need to reboot right now. You can also get to this thing with the web console using its domain, using Control-Alt, using its name, using its IP address, even using a static IPv6 address. As you may have guessed from this FFFE in the middle of this IPv6 link local, it is using EUI64. In any case, so this is one of my two ESXi hosts. We're going to do two of them. We're going to use them again in the next chapter because we're going to do things like storage vMotion. Anyway, so there's that. You can also, once you have that information in hand, you can go in here, over here from, say, a console like this and tie into it. One of the things you're probably going to want to do is make sure your ESXi hosts are in your DNS, so you don't have to punch in an IP address every single time. Now this is a slightly different configuration from the one you'll use, because this is a configuration I built for labs for a different version of this course, which will be coming in the fall. Anyway, so there's the DCUI. There's also the vSphere remote command line interface. There are also a couple of GUI interfaces. There's the vSphere client and the web client. The vSphere web client, it runs using HTML5. The vSphere clients that I've worked with so far work that way. There's also a vCenter server that we'll talk about in the next chapter. Your labs in this course, for this course in MindTap, use a slightly different vSphere client. It doesn't have all the horsepower, all the capabilities of the web client. And occasionally when you try to do things, say, create a certain kind of VM, say the latest version of VM, like when you were, if you've created your VMs in the ESXi host, and you do the latest version for the best compatibility, I think version 11 or something, it'll tell you, hey, you don't have all the features you want. if you want all the features you want, for all possible features, use the web client. Anyway, the web client is an HTML-based console, very useful for remote locations. It is also, even if you're in the same room with it, it's still a more powerful thing, because the thing about the DCUI is the DCUI is used to manage the ESXi host itself. It is not used to manage VMs. You can't even see the VMs that are running. You will need a web server. You will need a licensed version of vSphere with a web service provided by vCenter server. The vCenter server, what your vCenter server does is it centralizes your management for all of your ESXi hosts. It basically deploys an agent onto them, and then it can talk to them and move things around. You know, if you all you have is a single ESXi host, you can't do things like vMotion. Or if you have a handful of free feature incomplete ESXi hosts, you don't have vMotion. You don't necessarily have common storage spaces or distributed switches or any of that. So this kind of looks like this. So you've got your web client, which will talk to your vCenter server, which will talk to your hosts. Or you have your vCenter client, which again talks to your vCenter server, which talks to your host. And there are some things we can do in the command line. You've got your vi config user commands, vi config IPsec to turn IPsec on and off, security associations, security policy. You can add and remove VM kernel NICs. You can add and remove virtual switches, and you can even configure your file system itself. Virtual disks, file systems, logical devices, storage, data stores. We call these things data stores most of the time. And VMFS, as we've mentioned before, is its own file system. Very different in some ways than NTFS. So there's that. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about, the next video, we're going to talk about virtual networking and virtual switches. Thanks, and we'll be right back.